The chilly Manhattan breeze cut through the air on an autumn morning as Jasmine Richardson, one of the most influential women in the business world, walked toward the headquarters of Richardson Global Enterprises. Her $8.2 billion tech empire had revolutionized the artificial intelligence industry, but that morning, something entirely different was about to change her life forever. The heels of her Christian Louboutin shoes echoed against the concrete when a raspy, determined voice broke through the air. "Hey, you there! Important person!" A homeless woman, wrapped in several layers of tattered clothing, was pointing directly at Jasmine. "God told me to speak to you today." Jasmine's security guards immediately moved to intercept the woman, but something in her gaze made Jasmine raise her hand, signaling them to stand down. The homeless woman, who would later introduce herself as Ruby Thompson, showed no fear or hesitation. Her eyes, though weary, gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Everyone here walks past me every day pretending I don't exist," Ruby continued, her voice growing stronger. "But you, with all your money and power, what would you say if I told you God has a specific message for you?" Pedestrians began to slow down, some already pulling out their phones to record the unusual confrontation. The scene was surreal. One of the wealthiest women in the country, dressed in an elegant Chanel suit, face to face with a homeless woman talking about divine messages. Jasmine adjusted her designer glasses and did something no one expected. Instead of ignoring Ruby or asking her security to remove her, she stepped forward. What message would that be? Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was genuine curiosity in her tone. Ruby smiled, revealing the absence of a few teeth, but her smile carried a wisdom that transcended her appearance. "Before I tell you the message, let me ask you something. With all those billions, do you really believe in God? Or is God just another investment in your portfolio?" The crowd that had formed held its breath. Jasmine's security guards tensed. The response that followed wouldn't just shock everyone present, it would become a viral moment that spread across the globe. Jasmine's expression softened, surprising everyone. Her shoulders relaxed under her impeccable blazer as she stepped even closer to Ruby. "You know, a lot of people assume that money and faith can't coexist," she began, her voice carrying a sincerity that drew the crowd in closer to listen. "But before all of this," Jasmine gestured toward the skyscraper bearing her name, "I was just a little girl from the Bronx, kneeling by the bed every night with my grandmother, praying for our next meal." Ruby blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. Her gloved hands, worn and torn, gripped the shopping cart full of belongings she carried with her. "So, why do you walk past people like me every day without looking? Where is God in your empire?" The crowd grew larger. Executives running late to meetings stopped to watch. Teenagers held up their phones, streaming live. The moment crackled with an electric tension. "You assume I don't look," Jasmine replied, removing her sunglasses. "But do you know what Richardson Global does every Thursday on this very block?" She pointed toward a nearby alley. Ruby frowned, puzzled. A woman in the crowd murmured loudly enough for all to hear, "The Mobile Assistance Program. It's true, I've seen it." Jasmine nodded. "Doctors, social workers, lawyers, all volunteers. No cameras, no publicity. Because God," she paused meaningfully, "doesn't need the spotlight to do his work." The revelation caused a ripple of murmurs in the crowd. Ruby stepped back, her posture subtly shifting. "If that's true, why have I never heard about it?" "Because sometimes," Jasmine replied, "true faith isn't about shouting from the rooftops, but about doing the quiet work that needs to be done." What happened next would leave everyone speechless, turning a seemingly hostile encounter into something far deeper and more meaningful. Ruby let out a bitter laugh, her hands trembling slightly as she held onto her shopping cart. "Pretty words for someone who lives in a penthouse. You talk about God like you know him. But do you know the last time I saw him?" The crowd fell silent, phones still recording, as Ruby continued. "It was 3 nights ago, when I was freezing to death under the bridge on 42nd Street. A girl, no older than 16, shared her blanket with me. She had nothing, just like me, but she shared anyway. Jasmine listened intently, not interrupting. Her driver glanced at his watch nervously. She was late for a meeting with international investors, but something kept her there, rooted in that moment. "And do you know what that girl said to me?" Ruby continued, her voice now trembling with emotion. "She said that God shows up in the most unlikely places, that sometimes He uses the most unexpected people to deliver His messages." At that moment, Ruby reached into her cart and pulled out something that made the crowd gasp. It was a drawing done on a piece of cardboard depicting a black woman in a suit surrounded by angels. The style was simple, almost childlike, but there was something eerily familiar about the figure. "The blanket girl drew this after having a dream," Ruby explained, her hands now steady. "She said she saw a powerful woman who would build a shelter, not just of walls and a roof, but of hope." She described you, Jasmine, perfectly. Even the pearl necklace you're wearing right now. Jasmine instinctively touched the necklace around her neck, a unique piece that had belonged to her grandmother. For the first time, her professional composure visibly faltered. "The message isn't mine," Ruby said softly. "It's that girl's. She asked me to find you and tell you that God didn't give you all these resources for nothing. The shelter you're going to build, it will change thousands of lives." A solitary tear slid down Jasmine's cheek, leaving a trail in her flawless makeup. What she said next wouldn't just surprise Ruby, it would turn that encounter into something much greater than anyone could have imagined. Jasmine took a deep breath, discreetly wiping away the tear with the back of her hand. For a moment, she looked up at the Manhattan sky, the skyscrapers around her seeming insignificant in the magnitude of that moment. "That girl," Jasmine began, her voice trembling slightly. "Where is she now?" Ruby lowered her gaze, clutching the drawing to her chest. She didn't survive last night. The cold was too much." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Some onlookers sniffled, others lowered their cameras, sensing they were witnessing something too sacred to be filmed. "What was her name?" Jasmine asked, her voice now firm and determined. "Hope," Ruby replied. "She said her mother named her that because she was born in a shelter, and hope was all they had at the time." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, as if making a decision. When she opened them again, there was a different kind of light in them. She turned to her executive assistant, standing nervously a few steps behind her. "Cancel all my appointments for today," she ordered, "and call the board. I want an emergency meeting in 1 hour." Turning back to Ruby, she extended her hand. "You're coming with me." Ruby hesitated, eyeing the outstretched hand warily. "Why?" "Because," Jasmine replied, "if God used hope to deliver this message, then I'll make sure her last night in this world wasn't in vain. That shelter, it's going to be called Hope's Haven, and you're going to help me build it." The crowd watched in silence as Ruby slowly placed her trembling hand in Jasmine's. The contrast between the two women could not have been starker, one in designer clothes, the other in layers of worn garments. But in that moment, something transcendental happened on the streets of Manhattan. What followed in the next 24 hours would not only change their lives, but spark a movement no one could have predicted. Inside the boardroom of Richardson Global Enterprises, executives in expensive suits shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Ruby, still wearing her worn clothes, sat to Jasmine's right at the head of the table. Hope's drawing was carefully placed in the center of the polished mahogany table. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Jasmine began, her voice carrying the tone that had built her empire. "Today, I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you that Richardson Global is about to embark on its most ambitious project yet." She pressed a button, and the automated curtains opened, revealing the panoramic view of Manhattan. That empty lot on 42nd Street, the one we purchased last year for the new tech hub, it's going to become Hope's Haven. The company's CFO, Thomas Wright, cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Richardson, That lot is worth over $50 million. The shareholders, Jasmine interrupted, will see the greatest return on investment we've ever had, but not in dollars. She gestured to Ruby, who slowly stood up. Tell them, Jasmine encouraged softly. Tell them what you told me about the people under that bridge. Ruby looked at the executives, her eyes carrying decades of untold stories. There are 217 people living under that bridge right now. I know every one of them by name. There's James, a war veteran with 3 medals of honor. Maria, who was a teacher before her husband's Alzheimer's drained all their savings. Little Tommy, 12 years old, who still does his homework using the streetlights. One by one, the executives lowered their tablets and phones, completely absorbed by Ruby's narrative. She continued for 20 minutes, detailing lives, broken dreams, and, most importantly, the unyielding resilience of each person. When she finished, tears glistened in the eyes of several board members. Jasmine stood again. Hope's Haven won't just be a shelter. It will be a complete transformation center. Medical care, rehabilitation, job training, legal assistance, all in one place. She projected a blueprint onto the screen, clearly prepared overnight. And most importantly, every person who passes through will have the chance to become part of the solution. We want them not just to receive help, but to help build something greater. What happened next in the boardroom proved that even the hardest corporate hearts could be touched by divine grace. Thomas Wright adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and did something entirely unexpected. He removed his Armani jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and stood. Ms. Richardson, my sister lived on the streets for 3 years before she got help. I've never told anyone in this company that. Other board members began to speak up, one by one. Patricia Chen, the director of innovation, revealed her father had been homeless. Marcus Thompson confessed he spent 6 months in a shelter during college. Suddenly, the boardroom was no longer just a corporate environment. It had transformed into a space of vulnerability and genuine human connection. Ruby watched in silent tears as the room opened up. We don't just need to approve this project, Thomas continued. We need to expand it. I have $5 million in bonuses this year that I can donate right now. Patricia raised her hand. The tech division can develop an app to connect homeless individuals with resources and job opportunities. One by one, the executives began offering not just financial resources, but also their time and expertise. The project was growing before everyone's eyes. Jasmine smiled, picking up Hope's drawing from the center of the table. Do you understand now? This is bigger than all of us. That girl wasn't just drawing a building. She was envisioning a movement. Ruby, who had remained silent during the declarations, finally spoke. Hope always said that sometimes God needs to break our hearts so he can enter. I think today he broke 15 corporate hearts all at once. The laughter that followed was soft, laden with emotion and understanding. Jasmine then picked up her tablet and displayed something that made the entire room gasp. She projected onto the screen a series of emails she had received in the past few hours. The video of the street encounter had gone viral, amassing millions of views in just a few hours. Celebrities, business leaders, and ordinary people from across the country were reaching out, eager to join the project. The hashtag Hope's Haven movement is trending worldwide, Jasmine explained, scrolling to show more messages. But what truly matters aren't the numbers. It's the stories that are emerging. She clicked on a specific video. On the screen appeared an elderly woman in Los Angeles, crying as she recounted how Hope had shared her last sandwich with her 2 months earlier. In Chicago, a man showed a drawing similar to the one Ruby had, also made by Hope. In Miami, a family shared how a young homeless girl had saved their son from drowning. The description matched Hope perfectly. Ruby stood abruptly, her legs trembling. Impossible. Hope never left Manhattan. How could she? Jasmine gently placed a hand on her shoulder. In the last 6 hours, we've received over 300 accounts of people who encountered a young woman named Hope, all with the same description, all with stories of inexplicable kindness, all with nearly identical drawings. The room fell into absolute silence. Thomas Wright, the skeptical CFO, was pale. "Are you suggesting that?" "We're not suggesting anything," Jasmine interrupted softly. "We're just acknowledging that there are things in this world that go beyond our corporate understanding. What matters is what we do with the message we've received." At that moment, Jasmine's assistant hurried into the room, holding her tablet with trembling hands. "Ms. Richardson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. It just came in." What she showed next would not only confirm that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary, but would also reveal an even deeper connection between Hope, Jasmine, and a divine plan that was only beginning to unfold. Jasmine's assistant projected an old photograph onto the meeting room screen. It was a yellowed image, clearly from the 1980s. In it, a young black woman held a baby in her arms outside a homeless shelter. Beside her, a teenage girl smiled shyly at the camera. "This photo," the assistant explained, her voice trembling, "was found in the archives of the Old Bronx Community Center. The woman in the picture is your grandmother." Ms. Richardson Jasmine approached the screen, her eyes wide. "And the teenager beside her? According to the records, she was a homeless girl who helped your grandmother when she went into labor on her way to the hospital. The baby in the photo is you." Ms. Richardson Ruby slowly rose to her feet, her hands covering her mouth. The teenager in the photo was identical to Hope. Not just similar, exactly the same person, even wearing the same patched coat. "That was 40 years ago," Jasmine whispered, softly touching the screen. "How?" the assistant continued. "The most extraordinary detail is the name recorded in the shelter's documents. The young woman identified herself as Hope," Ruby finished, her voice barely audible. "She told me she'd been here for a long time. I thought she meant months, maybe years." Thomas Wright, who had remained silent, began frantically searching on his phone. "Wait, there's more. So much more." He projected his screen onto the main monitor. What appeared next made everyone in the room question everything they thought they knew about faith, time, and divine purpose. Thomas displayed a series of historical photographs, each showing the same young woman, Hope, in different eras and locations. Chicago, 1962, helping during the Civil Rights Movement. Detroit, 1975, comforting workers after a major factory closure. New Orleans, 2005, rescuing people during Hurricane Katrina. At every critical moment in modern history, Thomas explained, his voice thick with emotion, there are records of this same young woman appearing, helping people in their most desperate times, and then vanishing. Jasmine held the original drawing by Hope, studying it with new eyes. In the bottom corner, nearly invisible, was a tiny inscription to remind us that angels still walk among us. "It was never about the shelter," Jasmine said softly. "It was about making us truly see one another." Ruby, who had remained silent, pulled something from her shopping cart, a small, worn journal. "Hope gave this to me last night. She said I'd know when to open it." With trembling hands, she opened the journal. Inside was just one message, written in the same handwriting as the drawing. "Dear children of God, you search for miracles in the heavens, but they are right beside you. Every person you ignore may be an angel. Every stranger you help may be divine. The shelter you will build is not just made of bricks and mortar. It is a testament that God's love still moves mountains through hearts willing to serve. Jasmine, your grandmother didn't survive just because I helped her that night. She survived because she believed. Ruby, you weren't chosen to deliver this message by chance. You two are proof that God doesn't see social status, only souls. Hope's Haven will be more than a shelter. It will be a reminder that miracles happen every day through ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary. with eternal love, hope. The meeting room fell into profound silence. Tears streamed freely down the faces of those present. Thomas's phone buzzed. More videos were surfacing worldwide, people sharing their encounters with Hope over the decades. 6 months later, Hope's Haven opened its doors. It wasn't just a building, it was a global movement. Similar shelters began emerging in different cities, all following the same principle: to see the divine in every person, regardless of their circumstances. Ruby became the director of operations, her experience on the streets proving more valuable than any MBA. Jasmine transformed Richardson Global into a company focused on social innovation, inspiring other corporations to follow suit. As for Hope, some say they still see her occasionally, always helping quietly, always disappearing before anyone can thank her. Her legacy, however, lives on in every person who enters Hope's Haven and leaves transformed. The original drawing now hangs in the shelter's main lobby. Below it, a simple plaque reads, "To remind us that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from the sky, but through the people God places in our path." And so, an unlikely conversation between a homeless woman and a billionaire became a living testament that God still speaks to us, sometimes through the most unexpected messengers, reminding us that His plans are greater than our circumstances. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because perhaps, just perhaps, the next angel you meet will be disguised as a stranger in need.